The 2025-26 Winnipeg Jets season must be the year the Jets finally turn to their long-awaited youth movement.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we're chatting a little bit about Winnipeg's future, and it starts with the youth movement needing to come this upcoming season. It can't be next year. It can't be the year after. The Jets need to finally utilize their ELCs. And with that, we have some concepts, perhaps, for how the Jets might look, especially if they try to run it back for the most part with some internal upgrades. And then finally, I want to reflect on whether or not this year's draft is even worth getting involved in. Should this be the year that the Jets maybe exchange some draft assets and try and push for a big roster player? We'll chat about that later in the show, but I think you can kind of see where I'm going with this. The answer is yes, it is time for Winnipeg to make the play. But first, let's chat about a little bit on Winnipeg's upcoming youth movement and how it might really shape the Jets' season and both the present and their future. But before we do, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. Now, like I said, this season for the Jets has to be the youth movement, right? Winnipeg has gotten very far as is using a lot of veteran talent, but let's be real. This team has a very clear ceiling, and I think we saw that in the series against the Stars where in many ways, the Jets actually would outplay Dallas at times. They would control play. They'd do pretty well. Hellebuck maybe did have a couple of games where he wasn't up to par, but for the most part, he improved. And so where you really were missing things was, the PK, your power play for the most part really going quiet, and the depth scoring kind of going in and out of phase, especially on the road. And so the Jets have, in my mind, gotten about as far as they can with what they have. Even if they were to return next year to the second round, right? Assuming that their opponent is an even better team than they faced already, how does that look for the Jets, right? I don't think Winnipeg, if they don't make any changes, would really do that well. We avoided Colorado, we avoided Vegas, and that's great. But next year, there's no guarantee that that happens. And those teams have traditionally been a nightmare for the Jets in the playoffs. So this time, Winnipeg needs to come back to the drawing board and start incorporating youth. Now, what's really challenging is that the Jets don't have a lot of immediate roster spots. They, again, really like the veterans. They're very loyal, and that kind of gets the team in a lot of trouble. What I'm hoping, the message comes from the locker room this time is that, the Jets did get 5 to 10% better internally with what they have. Now it's time to figure out if they can actually go more to like 15% good. I know that that's not really how Arneal has described it, but in my mind, that's the goal you need to set. Winnipeg has kind of maxed out what it's got with its veteran group, and you look at guys like Nikita Chibrikov, Brad Lambert, Elias Salamonson, perhaps. All of these guys might be able to contribute to the Jets' regular season and eventually their playoffs. And I don't think this is a situation where you want the Jets to put them in late in the season. If you really intend for them to become a big part of this team, especially for the upcoming season, the earlier the better. The sooner that they can get and come to grips with NHL caliber speed and decision-making and timing, the better it could be for the Jets once they hit the postseason. And more importantly, I also think it gives the Jets more insight into what they need at the trade deadline. We kind of knew this season what they would need, which was, a 2C and a top 4 defender. We know that they didn't get that. And so with that in mind, the Jets really need to see what they have in their kids. Now, Chibrikov, he's not going to be one of those big pieces. Where I think Nikita might really help is, look, Appleton kind of needs to walk. He's a good player, and I think in a lot of ways, as a fourth liner, he'd be fantastic. But the Jets have asked way more of him than just being a depth forward. He's been asked to be like a key second line-ish contributor, and it's just not his style of game. He's a good forechecker. He can be really decent in a defensive role, but if you ask him to do more than that, it's just not going to happen. And that's where Chibrikov or say Reshevsky, if Reshevsky comes over, could really be a key part of this middle six scoring unit. With how the Jets tend to use that third line anyways, Chibrikov might basically become Winnipeg's second line right wing. And I think that that could be a really good benefit. We know that he is a sniper and he's very pesky below the goal line. We've already seen him score some great goals this past season where he had a couple of games with the Jets. I really felt like out of camp, he should have been the one to make it. And I know the Jets, again, went veteran heavy. I respect that. But Winnipeg not leaning on its ELCs is going to bite it very soon. And I think that it's already happened this past year where they had a chance to improve internally before they reached the playoffs and before they had the trade deadline, and they didn't really give themselves enough of a chance, in my mind, to see what they had internally. And because of that, you had Chibrikov go back down. He then basically misses almost the whole season due to a serious injury. Brad Lambert had a really weird year with the Moose. He scored like third most points on the team or whatever, but because his finishing really took a bit of a nosedive with the team's goal scoring diving too, it looked like a much worse season than I think he really had. So yeah, this is where I think Winnipeg has really struggled in the past. And this year, they really need to incorporate the youth, right? There's no avoiding it. You can't get away from it. The Jets already have issues getting guys waiving their no trade clauses. If you already have players in your pool that you can start to lean on, maybe give them a shot. I think that this is the time to do it. Winnipeg is going to be in a bit of a transition season. I think that being a transition season doesn't necessarily mean the Jets are in for the roughest of rides. I just think for Winnipeg, this is a really good opportunity, right? You've got a couple of prospects who are a little bit past the season, but you've got 2 to 3 who could contribute now, and it's finally time to see if they can actually help out. Salomonson, I'm not really counting on. I don't think that he's quite there yet. I think he will be very soon, and I think it will probably happen after the season. But for this upcoming year, the Jets don't really have a lot of blue line spots. I think that there's more competition with the forward group, and that's where I think guys like Lambert and Chibrikov can really make an impact, especially if Ehlers walks. Ehlers and Appleton both departing, which I think is actually pretty likely based on what we've heard, to me opens up 2 very clear spots. Now, again, Lambert is not going to replace Ehlers 1-for-1. It's going to be an adjustment period, and I think it's going to take him time to really find his footing at the NHL level. But it just requires him to be a little confident and start to get the feel for that puck. Once he does, I really don't question his ability to be an impact contributor. The guy who I have a very dark horse eye for, though, and I don't think he's really come up in a lot of conversations for next season, is Braden Yeager. Lambert, Chibrikov, very easy to project. Yeager is a little bit of a mystery box, and I think in my mind, he actually could become Lowry's successor in that 3C role. If the Jets don't get a 2C, I actually think Yeager could potentially slide into your 3C or 4C role. If you start him off there and kind of shelter him a little bit, it might get him eased into the league and start to feel more confident at this level. I don't think his transition to the pros is going to be something that takes him too long. He just already looked very mature in camp, and I think when he comes back to preseason in a couple months, it's going to look a lot of the same, right? I think he's going to look very confident. I think he's going to look very mature, and so I don't really worry about him. I just wonder, what is his ceiling for his first rookie season in the NHL? Will there be a chance for him to prove himself this year? I doubt that he starts out of camp, but it wouldn't shock me if he does get a cup of coffee later in the season. He seems really good, and I think he's a very interesting sleeper pick to be a major impact player, kind of in the Stankoven sort of mold, right? A guy who's pesky, who's skilled, who plays a mature game even at a younger age and kind of stepped into an NHL lineup very quickly and could have a really big impact in Winnipeg's playoff run, and maybe allows them to try, perhaps bypass a lot of the angst we had about not finding a 2C at the trade deadline. So a lot of stuff to mull over, but amidst that, I did want to kind of give some thoughts about what I could see being some very interesting lines to go with for the upcoming Winnipeg Jets season. Now, there's going to be a lot of competition. I think it's going to be hard to fit everyone, but we'll kind of work through and suss out who really might make sense for this upcoming season's skilled players. And we're going to treat this as if we don't have any major trade acquisitions. Before we dive into next year's potential lineups, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered where the heck all your money went? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. It's a convenient all in one app that allows you to set goals, and it even has insights on what you're spending money on, including food delivery, streaming services, whatever it is, you name it, they've got it. And if you've got a partner or spouse, there are collaborative tools so you can set goals together and always stay on the same page. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about perhaps next season's NHL lineups for the Winnipeg Jets. Now, some of these I'm going to preface with the fact that I know Winnipeg's going to do something a little bit different, but here's, for me, what I would be personally interested in. And I'm going to try and take it with a grain of salt and with the idea that there are some things that I would like that, we're not going to have. And so I'm going to try and balance my own preferences and with what some of the data says, with what we know Arniel tends to like. Top line, let's go back to the CSI line, right? I think Connor Scheifele and Iafallo are perhaps not the world's best top line, but considering how the Jets tend to win by committee, I think it's a really dang good one. CSI has a good balance of offensive skill and forechecking ability, and Iafallo really fit like a glove. Now, obviously, it wasn't a perfect line, and I think we did see limitations to Iafallo's game. But the whole point of why you might go back to CSI is that it kind of gives a little bit more support to 81 and 55. We know that they really like playing together, and Vilardi just can't do it. I get Vilardi, and I like him a lot, but he is just not good enough to play with them. And I don't think it's necessarily a skill thing. I think there's a real mismatch in tool sets. And that's why when you have these three together, they don't always gel. There are some games against bad teams where they are extraordinarily good, but you actually look at how they play against top teams, and you just don't really see the same level of elite jump. They'll have good shifts, and I think that they had a couple against Dallas and St. Louis that looked really nice. But again, with Vilardi still ailing for most of those games that he was back for, and the top line just kind of having to really bear a lot of load, it would make more sense if you can distribute and spread out the talent. That's how a lot of the top contenders do it. And if you're a team like the Jets, you just don't have the luxury to not do it. So would prefer that. If we're looking at the second line, we're going to start to see Lowry take on a bigger role, especially if the Jets don't bring in a 2-seed. Now, I'm sure Nemesnikov's going to be the guy, but come on, Jets. It's time to stop making that your first go-to. Nemesnikov, really nice guy. Again, I mentioned on the previous episode, I think he's punched above his weight for years. It's time to stop making him the 2-seed. Real contenders just don't have fourth-line players elevated to this role. And so, look, Lowry's not the world's most elite 2-seed, but given the choices, I think he makes the most sense. And I would be down to see a 62-17 and perhaps either Shibrikov or maybe a Vilardi on that right side. I'd personally prefer Shibrikov. I think that might work a little bit better. Nikita has the finishing and forechecking ability to be a real pest, and I just think he's faster, right? 62 and 17 don't have a lot of speed, and so adding Shibrikov, who's a pretty good skater himself, to that trio might be that transformative aspect that makes that forechecking and grindy aspect of their games really start to sparkle and pop. We've already seen Shibrikov's early returns in a depth role, and I think alongside Lowry and Niederreiter, he'll finally bring out the best in the both of them. I think that they are both better than third-line players. It's just we have inconsistencies in their games, and part of it is because their third teammate on that line really doesn't bring a lot of offensive jump, and so Shibrikov could really solve that. Once you move to the third line, things start to get very interesting because, again, this is not really a third line, but if we're looking at potential combos, I'd be intrigued to see maybe a 91-36-13 trio. My biggest concern with this is that Barron last playoff run kind of disappeared. He had some really good stretches early, and then after that, he really started to fade and looked more like regular Morgan Barron. And so this is asking a fair bit of him. But maybe if you put him alongside skill, especially guys like Velarde and Perfetti, who are very creative players, maybe you can tease something out of him. Again, I don't know if I love this trio, but I would be willing to give it a shot. My personal preference would be to see Gustafsson get a bigger role. Gustafsson, I think, could be very intriguing, but I doubt that he's likely to have a real spot this coming season, especially if we're looking at maybe Lambert and Shubrakov both making it. I'm not convinced that both do, but given the likely departures, there are some real opportunities for guys like that to get in. Alternatively, you also could try Lambert down the middle, and if you pair Lambert with Perfetti, that could be really intriguing. They've had some success before. Or at least, in preseason, I think we had maybe a couple of shifts together. But I would be very intrigued to see if they can maybe make it stick at the NHL level. If not, and if the Jets want to kind of keep things with some level of veterancy, then this is where you might look at Lambert on the fourth line. And I know a lot of people are going to say that's useless and you shouldn't do it. But in my mind, for one thing, there's no NHL time that's useless. And with how the Jets tend to use their fourth line, I think that there's actually a really nice benefit to insulating Lambert early. I think if you're just starting off, you kind of want to ease him in because it did take him some time in his last NHL stretch to start ramping up. How I would maybe look at this is you could do something like maybe you have Nemestikov down the middle, Lambert on the right wing, maybe a Gustafsson somewhere in this mix. Obviously, the Jets are a little bit loaded for bear with depth forwards. Maybe you could put in a Parker Ford. I don't know that it necessarily matters too much, but, I think that there's some real options here. What's nice is that regardless of who you put on this fourth line, it'll probably do well. That was generally true this past season, and I think Lambert could provide some really nice tertiary scoring to the point where maybe your fourth line starts to look more like a third line, right? If you can use it more than a fourth line because it's actually good enough to play elevated minutes, I think that works out quite beautifully. So the Jets have some really good options here, and I'm curious to know how they arrange it. Again, how I suspect they're going to do this, I bet you we're going to see CSV again. We're going to have the same conversation about Nemestikov at 2C, and hopefully, we don't have to go through all of this again. It just feels like, the Jets are on the cusp of really figuring out why their playoff success has come short. And I really hope that this upcoming offseason, when they do their deep dive, when they really dig deep and look at where they've been successful and where they've really struggled with some of their lineup decisions, that the team as a whole is more open to some big changes. I think that this team has a lot of talent to work with, and I think if it was better arranged, you could maybe work through some of the clear talent gaps, right? Look, it's not going to solve every single problem, but I think this team has more to offer on paper than we've already seen. And that's saying a lot for a squad that, quite frankly, already overachieved with an amazing President's Trophy. So for me, there's some real good stuff to work with. It's time for the Jets to make the most of it. And amidst all of that, I gave this lineup without any real acquisitions via trade. But I do think that there is something coming in the pipeline, and it might happen around the draft deadline. Not the draft deadline, but the draft itself. And I want to chat about if this is the year the Jets should maybe cash in some of their draft picks and not use them, but instead trade them for some real help. Because this year's draft for me, not my favorite. We'll chat about all of that in just a brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting a little bit about Winnipeg, talking, through maybe this upcoming draft stuff. Obviously Winnipeg is one of those teams that claims it's a draft and develop team, and they've drafted very well recently. Still TBD on the development aspect, but I hopefully am expecting a turnaround over the next few years. It does seem like they're a little more cognizant of it than they've been in the past. TBD again on how that translates to NHLers, but I think this year's draft is probably one of the weaker ones that we've had in some time, and because of that, this is a really good opportunity for the Jets to maybe make some moves and not commit towards actually making picks. I know it sounds very silly, but in my mind, the Jets do a lot of their best work in deeper rounds. And so when you've got a first and you could maybe make some moves, maybe you should trade back, go back and acquire some deeper picks and swap out some stuff to potentially make a bigger play for a roster player. I don't think the Jets really need to worry so much about their prospect pool. If anything, they're flush with a lot of B tier and like B plus level prospects, right? And they're not likely to add some super elite talent drafting towards the end of the first round. It's just not likely to happen. Now, I think some people unnecessarily crap on this year's first round. The reality is, first round picks are always long shots, but if you're drafting top 10, you are probably expecting some NHLers to come out of that. Past that, though, it gets real dicey. And this year's draft, there doesn't really seem to be a lot of consensus. And so for Winnipeg, given how they tend to not, lean so much on their youth, I'm hoping that changes this coming year. But maybe it's also the time where instead of drafting some players, you bring in a big name, right? Look at I don't know, maybe you look at a Bo Horvat. Obviously he's not just going to be a first round pick. You're going to have to give up quite a bit. But this is the season where I think the Jets could make some hay, and it would obviously throw a real wrench into my predicted lines versus, interested Jets lines. But I would also really be in favor of the Jets trying to make some kind of a power move. There's a lot of players who are dissatisfied with their playing time elsewhere. There are teams that need to make some swaps. And for those reasons, I think that this is a prime opportunity for the Jets to swing big. They've got the assets. They've got the cap space. They didn't use it at the trade deadline like they said they were going to. They tried. Didn't work. Now they can actually make the most of it and get a full season's worth out of somebody. And again, do I expect this to happen? I don't know. In the past, I would say no. I think that this offseason could be very interesting for the Jets, though. Winnipeg is in a much different position than it was in previous years. The team is motivated. They've said that they're committed to winning a cup and that they're going to do all that it takes. And given how the players are likely to have felt like the trade deadline was a little bit disappointing relative to what they were expecting, I think there's going to be a real concerted push internally this summer to make something happen. And so if that's the case, this is the time to cash in your futures. You've got tons of them. You don't really need a lot of them. Make the most of it. Barlow, your first, some of those prospects, they might be able to help out another team more than what they can help out with Winnipeg. They're all great talents. They're all wonderful players, and a lot of them will be NHLers down the road. But for the Jets, they kind of need more immediate future help. This core's getting closer to the wrong side of 30, and so this team needs to bring in somebody who can help them bust that playoff hump. They've gotten further than they have in the past, and I think that they are like a couple of pieces away from being a truly scary team once the postseason starts. But, in the meantime, they've got lots of stuff to work with. And I think that's where this offseason, this summer, and this draft present a really fantastic opportunity. In a dream scenario, Elias Pettersson is maybe one of the most interesting plays. He comes with, again, loads of risk, and I think no team out there is really going to be willing to pay it right now, especially, the Jets. There may be some other squads who would swing for that, but I don't think it's going to be Winnipeg. Marco Rossi could be a guy that the Jets target. Again, I don't think in-division trades are going to really be a thing with a guy like Rossi from the Wild, but maybe Minnesota isn't as worried about that. Tommy Novak, I've talked about at length before. My personal feelings on him. I think he could be attainable from the Penguins. There's a lot of talent out there that could solve some really specific needs for the Jets. They just have to kind of take what they did at the trade deadline and actually follow through on it. I know that the trade deadline, I've talked at length about it and how I was frustrated. It is what it is. It happened. You can't go back in time, but I think that there's real lessons to take from it. And chief among them is that the Jets really need to pony up and swing. This is the offseason to do it. This is the summer to go for something special. And if the Jets do that, then, I really feel that they can have no regrets about how the rest of the season goes. You'll always feel like something was left on the table and something was waiting for you that you didn't get to see because you didn't have the chance to. But if you take all the swings that you can and you give yourself the best shot, then no one can have any complaints. If you don't make the dance and if you don't get that far, it is what it is. You swung as hard as you could. You went for a home run. It didn't work out. Colorado, I think, is exactly in this boat. They've already got their cup, though. The Jets don't. And so for Winnipeg, this could really be a special summer to help them make that final push. I know how the Jets usually are. I know that there's tons of reasons to not really think about this and not really believe it's going to happen. But for once, I want to have some faith in this front office to realize that what they did this past year wasn't good enough. And with a team that's already ready to push for that next step and reach that next level, give them something. Reward the team and the fan base with a big acquisition. Let me know who you think the Jets should target. Drop your thoughts below or in the comments or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. We'll probably explore some of the real potential, trade packages and stuff over the next few weeks. Obviously, we're still waiting to know who exactly is going to be on the market anyways. It's mostly just speculation right now. Horvat's name isn't exactly one that's actively being shopped, but with the Islanders making some management changes and a lot of teams needing to move some players around and try and restructure their rosters, the Jets are one of the few squads that can frankly add some big talent. So very exciting summer in my mind is upcoming. I think the fall is going to be a very bright moment for the Jets fan base. I'm hoping that we have somebody new that's not drafted to really get excited about. I'm hoping that some of our rookies are given some real opportunity to step into this Jets team. And, I'm looking forward to next year. In previous years, maybe I wasn't as excited. This coming year, though, I'm feeling pretty optimistic for the Jets. And I just hope that whatever happened, this playoff run, that they take the right lessons, they learn from it, and they make some big plays for something much more special next season. But again, give me your thoughts on the upcoming offseason and what you expect the Jets to do. We'll probably talk a little bit about that over the next couple of weeks and maybe share some of your comments and thoughts and react to them as we go through. But for tonight's show, that is all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. So see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.